Hello, everyone. I hope whenever you are watching this video, you are doing well. My name is Kelsey. I am the Associate Director at the Career Center here at IUP. And for today's installment of our video series, we are talking about all things interviewing. So we're going to just jump right in and talk about the types of interviews that you might encounter throughout the course of your career. Each of these have their own unique set of challenges and things to consider. So the one-on-one interview is what I think most people associate with when it comes to interviewing. You have one person interviewing for a position being asked questions by a recruiter. So that person, they're sitting across the table or next to each other, and one person is asking questions and the person is answering, and it goes back and forth. A group interview is really unique, and you might never encounter this, but if you do, this is when you're interviewing with multiple candidates all vying for the same position. So you'll be sitting with a group of people all wanting one position. You have a recruiter or maybe a few recruiters asking a question, and then each person in the group will go around and answer. So for this, if you're the first person to be asked the question, you kind of have the entire floor. No one's answered the question yet, so you don't have to worry about repeating an answer. Whereas the last person that has to answer that question has to make sure that they're paying attention throughout the entire interview and not repeating what everyone else has already said. A panel interview is what you see pictured on the screen. So this is where you have one person interviewing and then multiple recruiters sitting across from them and asking that person questions, and they're doing the question and answer back and forth. Now, for the panel interview, one of the big things to keep in mind is that you want to make sure that you're engaging and making eye contact with each person that's asking the questions. Sometimes I think it's human nature to focus on the person who you think's in charge or who you maybe connect with and is smiling and giving you those positive affirmations, but you don't want to leave anyone out or feel like they're excluded. So making sure that you're answering the question and sharing your answer with each person that's sitting across from you. Now, informational interviews are a completely different type of interview. This is where you are reaching out to someone to maybe have a cup of coffee or chat on the phone for a little bit, where you ask them about their career, how they got to where they are, maybe advice that they would have for someone that's looking to enter that field. This is a great networking tactic and a great way to meet people and explore different career options. Virtual interviews are becoming more and more prevalent today. Now, this is really unique. So, companies and organizations have different software or platforms where candidates can log on and then they will answer questions and they'll be video recorded. You're a lot of cases not actually even speaking to another person. You're just the question will pop up, you'll answer it, you're recorded answering the question, and then that's what gets sent. So, you don't have anyone that you're having that Q&A back and forth with. Skype and Zoom interviews are also becoming a lot more popular. A lot of these are done typically in early rounds, early stages of interviews. And so for a Skype or Zoom interview, that's where you are doing some type of video conference or video call with the recruiter. So you're talking to them through a computer screen. Now, with these, you want to make sure that you don't have anything distracting in your background, you have good lighting, you have a strong internet connection. So those are all things you'd want to take care of before the interview would start. And then the phone interview, I think, is oftentimes one of the most difficult interviews simply because you can't see the other person that's talking with you, and really they can't see you. So with interviews, it's oftentimes about making a strong first impression. So we'll hear employers say all the time that they can teach skills of the job, but they can't teach attitude. And so that's why we emphasize making a strong first impression and how important that is. And so that's what you wear, having a strong handshake and smiling. And with a phone interview, you can't really do that. So some things to keep in mind are to dress professionally, even though it's tempting to just roll out of bed. It puts you in the mindset to have an interview conversation, to make sure that you continue to smile and enunciate your words and show enthusiasm through the phone. One of the perks of doing even a Skype or Zoom interview and a phone interview is that you can have some notes in front of you, but you want to make sure that you're just using those as an aid, not a script. So you can very easily tell when someone is reading something that was prepared beforehand. during an interview, you're going to stumble over your words. Things probably aren't going to come out exactly as you rehearsed, and that's okay. We're human. So having notes out can be really helpful because it might cue you to think of things that you would have otherwise forgot, but you don't want to read it as though you're reading a script. And with a phone interview in particular, if you sound distracted, unfriendly, or just overall not enthused to be speaking with them, oftentimes you'll move them directly into the no pile. So a couple things to consider if you find yourself encountering any of these interviews. Now, when it comes to interviewing, there are steps to take, and we are going to be talking about each one of these with a little bit more detail here today. So, the first is researching and preparing, practicing, dressing appropriately, that is important, arriving early, exercising proper etiquette throughout the interview, as well as after the interview, which leads into the last thing we'll be discussing, which is following up. So, before the interview even takes place, there's some work that needs to be done on your end. So, researching and preparing, researching the company, the organization, looking at their mission and vision statement, maybe even researching the company's competition, looking up news articles. What are some initiatives they've been involved with? Have they been in the news recently? Just kind of getting a feel for where they're at. If possible, researching the interviewers, that can be really helpful. I just spoke with an employer last week who said that they like when a candidate looks them up. They know a little bit about them, how long they've been with the company, maybe where they went to school. A lot of times that's a great way to have a nice conversation starter. Maybe if it's an IUP alum, you can talk about their time there as well. And that's a great kind of common issue that brings you together. Read about industry trends and issues in your specific field, and then start preparing appropriate, thoughtful answers. Now, you're not going to know what they're going to ask you, but think of broad topics. So that's really where looking at the job description can come in handy. So you can see, okay, for this role, they're looking for someone with strong communication skills that has supervised a team in the past, that has a proficiency in certain software. And so then from that, you can start to think of, okay, what are some examples of when I've showed that I've had strong communication skills? Can I talk about the experience I have with the software that they're discussing? And so you can prepare to answer questions if those larger, broad topics are brought up. You also want to prepare appropriate, thoughtful questions. Typically, at the end of any interview, you, as the person interviewing, will have a chance to ask the recruiter some questions. You always want to have questions prepared. We recommend having at least 3 to 5. Now, that doesn't mean that during the interview, a couple other questions might pop up and you ask those instead, but having a few prepared beforehand will help you, especially if nothing does come up, and so you know exactly then what you want to ask. You want to make sure that you identify a sharp, professional clothing to wear, you have a professional suit and you tried it on beforehand, and ensure that any references you'll be using are notified. That's really important. When you're using someone as a professional reference, you first want to ask that they feel comfortable having them use you as a reference, and then make sure you let them know that you are sharing their information with a recruiter when you're applying to different positions. So just really keeping them in the loop is key. So some other things to do before your interview. When you're offered the interview, ask for the names and titles of your interviewers. This will also give you a good indication as to whether or not it's a one-on-one interview or maybe a panel interview. You can also ask at this time how long the interview is expected to be. I know I did a phone interview using myself as an example, and I thought, well, that can only be 15 minutes, right? They had planned about 45 minutes to an hour. And so mentally, I would have prepared a lot differently for a 45-minute conversation versus a 15-minute conversation. So ask how long they're expecting to talk to you. Have a well-fitted suit ready to wear, and then start that preparing. So I always tell students to make a study guide, which sounds kind of silly, of themselves, but this will help you know what to discuss and what to highlight in terms of skills that you have and achievements. So begin by brainstorming recent experiences that you have had, accomplishments that you believe will best demonstrate your skills in relation to the job that you're applying for. One thing that's really important is to have several strong examples in mind to support your skills and strengths. That's again why looking at the job description is key. What would they want to know about you? And those examples are really helpful because rather than just telling someone you have experience or that you're a strong team player or a really good leader, show them how you've demonstrated that in the past and have those list of questions ready to go. Next comes the time to practice, practice, practice. So, practice conversation. This sounds kind of silly, but have a couple well rehearsed sentences about why you are the right person for the job. This might just be your elevator speech. Practice small talk. So, what are some topics of conversation that you can bring up if you ever have to walk with the recruiter or there's maybe a lull before they're asking that Q&A? So, the weather, the building space, the company itself. You want to stay away from any controversial topics and keep it kind of light. You also want to practice answering questions. Now, you can do this in a variety of ways. You can have someone actually ask you the questions and you answer. You can just practice looking at yourself in the mirror. Or I always share when I do this presentation that when I've interviewed in the past, I've answered questions as I've been driving. So I'll kind of just ask myself a question and then answer that. One thing that I think is really important to keep in mind with practicing is sometimes what you think you're going to say in your head versus what you say out loud can sound completely different. And so I think it's really helpful, even if you don't want to have someone ask you the questions, to just say answers out loud, because then it'll help you think, okay, that's not what I wanted to say. And so then you can rework it before the interview actually, and you're saying it to a recruiter. And then practice asking questions. So develop appropriate questions to ask when given the opportunity to do so. Now, part of that preparing beforehand, like we said, is dressing the part. So, for an interview, this is the time you really want to dress business professional. So, in terms of suits, you want to wear a business suit in a conservative color. So, navy, gray, or black is preferred. Any shirts underneath should coordinate with the color scheme. You don't want anything that's too loud, and you don't want a neckline that's lower than the collarbone. You can wear a dress shirt and tie, and you may wear either a pantsuit or a skirt suit. It's really your preference. If you do choose a skirt, it should be no more than 2 inches above the knee. Now, for shoes, you want shine shoes with wingtips or loafers, dark socks. You don't want to wear your Nike athletic socks. And if you do choose to wear a heel, then those should be a low medium heel or flats. You want something that you feel comfortable in and are able to walk in without any issues, and neutral hosiery. Now, in terms of hair and accessories, your hair should be clean, neat, and pulled away from the face. You don't want anything hanging in front of your eyes or that you're tempted to play with. If you do have facial hair, it should be well groomed. Jewelry should be kept to a minimum. So you don't want anything that's too distracting. So very simple jewelry. And you want to have a good quality briefcase or portfolio for any papers that you're bringing with you. So you might have copies of your resume, your cover letter, your references. Maybe you have a portfolio of some work that you've done. You want to make sure that's in a good quality pad folio or briefcase that you can take with you. Cell phones should be turned off. And if you do choose to wear cologne, you want to make sure it's just a subtle amount, so nothing too strong. Now, on the day of the interview, you want to make sure that you have your outfit laid out. You've tried it on beforehand, it's pressed or steamed. You have some maybe extra supplies depending on where you're going. This could be a lint brush, a hairbrush, shoe polish. Western PA, we seem to sometimes have Four Seasons all in one day, so maybe you need an umbrella. You want to make sure you're prepared and you don't run into any hiccups. It might be helpful to bring a notepad and pen if you want to take some notes during the interview. Having a few copies of your resume, cover letter, and references printed on a resume paper is a good idea. You might not need them, but it's better to have them than to not. And examples of your work if it applies to the position. So oftentimes this would be a portfolio. And something to remember is that the interview lasts from the time you get out of the car to the time you get back into the car. So we've heard stories from recruiters that they'll look to see, are you friendly with maybe the person that greets you as you're entering the building, the secretary or administrative assistant that checks you in? If there's other candidates waiting, are you smiling or are you just on your phone? Are you rude and do you seem distracted? And so keep in mind, as soon as you get out of the car, you want to be in interview mode. You also want to arrive early. So if there's ever a time to arrive early, it's certainly for an interview. So plan to arrive at least 10 to 15 minutes before the interview time. Now, if you want to get to the site earlier than that, maybe just not going into the building until, 20 minutes before so that you arrive at the office 10 to 15 minutes before would be our recommendation. You don't want to show up so early that it's a little off-putting and the recruiter or organization feels like they have to accommodate you. Make allowances for traffic, any other potential obstacles. Make sure that you have cleared where to park. Do you have to pay to park? Is it a meter, a parking garage? You have all of that worked out. Giving yourself some time to freshen up after arrival is nice as well. So maybe you run to the bathroom, check to make sure your suit looks okay, and that when you enter the office space, you're ready to go. Greet any office personnel friendly, and you can use this time, because your phone should be off, to review any notes and key points that you want to address. So use this as a time to kind of refresh your memory. Okay, these are the things I want to talk about, so when they come out to greet you, you're ready to go. The introduction is key. So this goes back to making a strong, positive first impression. So when you introduce yourself, you want to have a warm smile. You definitely want to exude confidence, even if you're not feeling super confident and are a little nervous. Do not let that come across. You have the handshake, so we talk about handshakes a lot in our department. You don't want to hesitate. You want to have a firm grip, not too firm, about 2 to 3 seconds, making good eye contact. Repeat or say the person's name. So if a recruiter comes out and says, "Hi, my name is Kelsey Thompson," you would repeat their name back. "Hi, Ms. Thompson, it's very nice to meet you." Stay positive and enthusiastic and speak clearly. So make sure that you're enunciating your words and aren't using any slang. Now, during the opening stages of the interview, after you make that introduction, oftentimes you'll walk back to a room where the interview will then take place. As best as you can, try to stay calm and focused. If you can stay calm during this beginning stages of the interview, that will translate throughout the rest of the interview. If you're real worked up and really nervous and have a lot of kind of anxious energy, it's hard to come down from that. So take a deep breath and really try to think to yourself, I'm just talking to another person about what I've done. That's as simple as it gets. The interviewer will begin. Oftentimes they'll have an agenda prepared, so just kind of follow their lead. Keep an open body language. So one of these Wednesday sessions coming up, we will be talking all about body language, but you want to make sure that you seem comfortable and relaxed. You have an approachable stance, so that would mean avoid crossing your arms or leaning too far forward and back. Leaning forward demonstrates interest, so keep that in mind, and make sure that you are smiling and have good body language. Listen. This is very important. It's really easy to get distracted during an interview and start thinking about how you will answer upcoming questions. So you want to make sure that you listen to what's being asked of you so that you can answer the question fully. Also, be prepared for different types of interviewer styles. So some people interview and they're very stern, others are more relaxed and will give a lot of positive affirmations. They might smile and nod as you answer questions. Don't be alarmed. There are a lot of different ways people approach interviews, so just be prepared for that. During the interview, things to remember: show your enthusiasm for your field of work and convey genuine confidence. Let them see your personality. Like I said earlier in this presentation, a lot of times companies and organizations, if you make it to an interview, you meet the requisite skills that they're looking for and you have the experience needed. Otherwise, they wouldn't bring you to an interview. So they're trying to really see, okay, is this person going to be a good fit for my company and organization? That's where your personality needs to come through. You should try to have your answers be anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes in length. If more than one person is interviewing you, so if you do find yourself in a panel interview, making sure you're making eye contact with each person. Be aware of your body language and mannerisms. Keep an open mind and be respectful of other people's experiences and responses to your answers. Trying to speak in a professional tone as best as possible is important, and to avoid filler words. So we're all guilty of using like. A lot of times it's part of our natural dialect, but if you find that when you're nervous, you tend to use them more frequently, make sure that you practice those questions beforehand so you can avoid doing so during the interview. And then with each of your answer, the biggest thing you really want to discuss or keep in mind is that you want to back up your skills, your knowledge, your experience with examples. So don't just tell them that you are a good team player or have X experience or Y experience. Show them. And that's where examples become very handy. So one of the more popular interviewing methods are behavioral-based interviews. This is where they ask you a question to see how you've reacted in a past situation, because that will indicate how you will react in a future situation. So behavioral-based questions oftentimes start off with, can you tell me about a time when? Can you share an example of? They're asking you to draw upon a specific experience. And so that's where the STAR method becomes really handy in answering those types of questions. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. It's not something you have to follow verbatim. So when you're answering, you don't want to get robotic and say, okay, the situation was da 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 da, the task was da 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 da. It's more of a way for when you're talking through your answer to make sure that you're staying on track and you're providing all the necessary information so that that person that's listening to your answer understands where you're going. So situation is where you really lay out what you're talking about. So what's the story that you're sharing? The task is what you were faced with. Action is what action you took. And then the result kind of wraps everything up. So it brings it full circle. On the screen, we've listed some common topics that you might encounter during an interview. So they might talk about your work history. They might ask you to expand upon some skills. They might ask you to talk about future goals. A lot of times, interviews might involve just expanding on your resume. So making sure that you feel comfortable talking at length about your resume and expanding on the information that was included there. I've also listed some common questions. So again, the beauty of interviewing is that you really never know what you will be asked, but these are some fairly common questions. So tell me a little bit about yourself is a great way to begin an interview, and that's where we recommend using your elevator speech. Tell me about a time you had to deal with a difficult customer or coworker and how you handled that situation. That would be an example of a behavioral-based question where you would use that STAR method to answer. Strengths and weaknesses, that's another fairly common topic. So identifying before the interview when you're preparing some examples of strengths that you feel like you have, as well as some weaknesses. And with both of those, you want to make sure that you have some examples, and especially with the weakness, show how you're working to improve it. On the screen, I've also listed some questions to ask the interviewer. So at the end of the interview, typically you will have the time to ask that person some questions. And so you always want to have 3 to 5 prepared. They can be on the training, how the position will be evaluated, what they're looking for in an ideal candidate. And then we always recommend the last question be, when can you expect to hear from them? So that you know their hiring timeline and when it's appropriate to follow up. So during the closing stages of the interview, the interviewer will initiate the end of the interview, so you'll know when things are wrapping up. You want to make sure that you confirm your interest in the position as best as you can. If you have not asked when you can expect to hear from them, just clarify their follow-up procedure. This is your chance for another strong handshake. Use the interviewer's name when saying thank you. So thank you, Ms. Thompson. It was really great to speak with you. And if you don't have their business card or their email address or a way to get in contact with the people that you spoke with, make sure you have so, because the follow-up is crucial. So after the interview, you want to make sure that you take the time to send each interviewer an individual thank you note, and this can be something that is handwritten or sent via email. So it doesn't have to be anything too lengthy. You really want to make sure that you just thank them for speaking with you, reference something specifically from the conversation, and thank them for the opportunity and share that you look forward to speaking with them soon. You could also request a connection via LinkedIn. And if you have not heard back from the company or organization in the amount of time that they predicted, so if they shared, you can hear from them in about 2 weeks. If those 2 weeks have come and gone, then it would be appropriate to send an email or give them a call and ask the status of the position and re-express your interest. So that wraps up everything we have to share about interviewing. There are certainly a lot more tips and tricks we could discuss. So if you are interested in learning more, please reach out to our department. We are here to help. Our office is open and taking virtual career coaching appointments. We can review your resume and cover letter electronically. And we also have a full program of events happening throughout the next couple of weeks. So certainly check out our social media accounts to stay up to date on what we have going on. I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to hopefully speaking with you again all soon.